Just a very quick start. My name is Jeremy. I am the co-founder of Kaigan Games. So what I will be covering is this, the basic structure on how you build a story. So it's a very basic structure. A narrative approach to game design. Video game characters. So what makes a character, what not makes a character, what makes good characters, what makes bad characters, things like that. Narrative themes, tone and presentation, setting, lore, and world building. A story is basically an account of events from a perspective of a real or an imaginary person. What makes an engaging story? Essentially, somebody who wants something very, very badly, but is facing extreme obstacles. The character, which is me, whatever that I want, I need to want it like very, very badly. I think more important for games in particular is the structure. I think video games in particular, the structure is very, very, very important because of how video games work. For Act 1 is the setup. Okay, setup is basically what is happening in this world. So conflict in a sense where I want something, but I can't really get it yet because something is holding me back. So whatever I choose to resolve that conflict, I get the resolution. I can expand it a bit further with this as well. Act 1 is the setup, so that means there'll be a lot of exposition, there'll be a lot of storytelling. Okay, so during the conflict, sometimes we also have to remember that for the character to resolve the conflict, they need to do something. What are they doing? What are they trying to what they're trying to do? What is their goal and what they're trying to do? Holding all of this together is what we call the dramatic question, or rather, there's themes. There's also one thing we like to call is the dramatic question. The dramatic question is basically basically the very, very thin fiber that holds all of this together. So basically, what does the protagonist want, and will they get it at the end? I think what we really need to remember is I think this part. Someone who wants something badly but is facing extreme obstacles. If you Google the 3X structure, right, you will see tons of graphs and charts and things like that. You see a lot of people trying to really justify or really trying to explain the 3X structure. And they're all very different, but they're all not wrong. Because in every movie, TV, film, video game, if you have the structure, doesn't mean that it will be good, or doesn't mean that it will be perfect. If you do not have a structure, if you do not have the 3X structure, it does not mean it's going to be bad. It can be a very unique way of telling a story. Okay. In video games, it's different. In video games, it's interactive. You are controlling somebody. You are talking at somebody. You are interacting with stuff. If you do not want to do something, you can just choose not to want to. If a boulder is running towards your character and you just stop and just let it happen, it's going to happen, and that might break the flow of the story. If you look at the video games can be. I think if you want to. Again, look at it at a very basic structure, a very basic level. They're made out of sequences, so they're all divided into sequences. And in this sequence, you can set whatever you want to happen. Okay, a sequence can be either gameplay or cutscene. You can modify the structure on how you see fit, as long as you maintain the essential elements of your story. Essentially, the elements of story are these couple of things. It might be all, it might not be all, it might not be all, but it's most of these things. Okay. The inciting incidents is when the foul is being thrown at him and it's like, okay, you need to look at this. Okay. The journey is the back and forth, the banter, the banter, the drama between Coulson and Tony Stark, Again, crisis and climax, it depends on how you want to look at it. If you want to find the crisis in there, it's like, like the conflict comes to a boiling point and then he leaves. And then the resolution is that finally Pepper convinces him, maybe you should look at it, and then he looks at it. The dramatic question is going to carry through this whole thing. So these elements works on a very macro point of view. These elements also works on a very micro point of view. So when you want to break down all of your story into beats in units and acts and sequence or whatever it is, as long as you can keep track of this, what's going on in that moment, you are fine. Which actually comes first, gameplay or story? I would say, cheat answer that actually could be either one. Could be either one. Depending on how do you want to start. I start with a story, turn it into a game. Bottom up is I start with the mechanics, how do I turn it into a story? So you can actually do it two ways. Some games even do it from both. So a narrative approach to game design is basically this. You have to come either way, you have to unite the center. Your game has to be the ultimate vision of what you want the game to be. But you also have to make sure that these both meet together nicely. So use your story to form the vision for your gameplay. You need to also draw parallels between your story and your mechanics. So for example, if your story, the story and the mechanic has to work one and the same. The story is basically sequence of events. If you look at story, right, story is just basically this happened, that happened, this happened, that happened, this happened, that happened, and then we move on. Okay? All right. Narrative is basically how you choose to tell the story. If you want to put it side by side, story is the setup, the conflict, the resolution, and narrative is context, the narrative is the emotion, and the narrative is the basically evidence or the things that are presented in the story itself, the stuff that you see and hear and things like that is if you can remember what makes a narrative, you can start to control how do you want to present it. So if you remember all these elements, if you can make sure that you can contain these elements into forming a story in terms of forming a narrative, then you need to make sure that then this can come across better. So things like theme, characters, setting, plots and events in relation to each other, and presentation. Things you can move around, things that you can adjust. You have stuff that is set in the story already, and then you have stuff in the game as well. So story constraints is basically like if you're starting from looking at if your game is very story specific, there are things that you cannot change. A game's mechanics is largely determined by its genre. So one thing also that you have to take into account is that if you do start from a mechanical point of view, you're not limited, but I would say your constraint would be determined by the genre it's in. Pacing is the tempo and the rhythm of your game. If you pace it very well, you can keep the audience engaged as engaged as possible. Pacing are largely determined by what the sequences itself. But how you do it, how you linger on one scene and lead to the other, that's how you decide how to make things interesting. One of the things that I learned in theater is this Japanese concept called Johaku. In theater, when we learn about pacing in movement, there is always a sense of there is a setup, there is an acceleration, there is a deceleration. This rhythmic structure is also present in songs. So songs is also structured in, there's an intro, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, bridge, outro. So this is the first time I'm actually showing this outside of my colleagues. Okay, so I'm going to show you this. How do branching story paths have acts? So what I'm showing you here is basically the story structure for Simulacra 2. So even though we do branch out, we do make sure that it always comes back to a point where no matter what happens, we always come here. We always make sure that at the end of the day, to resolve all of these branching paths and to make sure that we know what the player needs to do at this point in time. Okay, so for my example, I might think of something like this, like some of the more memorable video game characters. The plot, just the sequence of events in the story itself. There is a recent study done by Microsoft actually, where they find that people actually have a lot of difficulty tracing the game's plot from the beginning to the end. This is especially true for video games, not so much in terms of film or TV and so on and so forth, because again, those are very linear. Characters are somebody who wants something very badly. And if you want to make good characters and you want to make characters remember, okay, all of these wants, all of these objectives, the more more they come into conflict, or the more they intersect with each other, the better your story becomes, the better your character becomes. Video games characters are particularly hard to portray because we are expected to become the character. So what do you mean by this? When you make a character in a film, or when you make a character in a TV show, or so on and so forth, you're actually creating a character that like it's like an avatar that the audience can watch, can understand, can see, and when you see them do things, it is what the character does. The character, the video game character that you're playing, and the player yourself has to be aligned and in sync. Okay, so that means you, the player, your desire, your character, you are as you, the human being, your desire, and your character's desire has to be the same. What do they want? What are the actions that they take to get what they want? And how would you describe them? So these are basically the three elements of a character, the very, very core elements of character. What do they want? Let's say if you look at Kratos, I want to spread my wife's ashes all over the highest point of 9 realms. Okay, the actions, Midgard, the realm that they're in, is definitely not the highest point. So I need to get to the highest point, and where the highest point is, I need to travel to multiple realms to figure out how to get there in the first place. Okay, how would you describe them? You can also, characters also depend, of course, depend on their looks. If you look at the player, okay, what do you want? What the player wants to do? What are you getting? What are you doing to get what you want? This is the gameplay point of view, and how do you project yourself into the character? And the game itself, the game also needs to enforce your objective as well. What is your objective? What the game wants you to do to be able to move the plot forward? What are your character's actions in the form of the gameplay? So that means the game itself, the rules of the game. All of these things, all of the things that I lay out like this, needs to be in sync, needs to be aligned. It might not be a perfect unity, but as united as possible, as unified as possible. It won't be perfect, but you need to do your very best to achieve this as much as possible. Okay, how do you achieve unity between character and player? For the player to be in tune with the character's motivation, their character's wants, okay, there also needs to be some sort of buy-in, you know. Empathy is the ability to feel what other people feel. This is a very basic human nature. Again, keep your wants and how badly it is as simple as possible. And the simpler they are, the easier it is to connect. Sometimes there might be moments where you and what you want and your character might not be in sync. Even though your game presents a scenario where it is the end of the world and people are dying everywhere or whatever, however grim, however sad, however traumatic, however stressed, always remember to find space, time, and moments where your character can share their feelings and thoughts. Themes is something that is present throughout the game that you play. They're not the dramatic question, but essentially what you're talking about is basically the subject matter of the game itself. What kind of theme do you care about? Because when these kind of games are being made, again, you cannot just want to make a game about war. You have to be really personally connected to it. Your mechanics, your game mechanics, have to match the theme. So your team itself has to express the main goal. Your team and your goal also have to make sense. Is your team familiar or new? Yet new. Teams are also a way to communicate in terms of the marketing. Tone and presentation is basically how you want your game to feel. So again, it's the tone and presentation is like, how do you choose to reveal your narrative? This is actually the last topic, which is setting, lore, and world building. So lore and world building is the concept of fleshing out a setting beyond its initial concept. It's about building a sense of place that transcends the original concept of plot. World building compromises of two categories, character and setting, and they both give weight to the experience. This is basically our story Bible. This is the document that we create to make sure that all the characters, all the story, all the elements, the world, the characters, the things that interact with each other, all of this are mapped out in this giant like 40-page document. Thank you guys for sticking with me throughout this whole thing. some kinks along the way, but I hope you guys learn something, and I hope you guys enjoy this session.